So Vernon Jones is a Trump-endorsed candidate. Where was he? I think he was Georgia. Let me look it up as I'm talking to you guys now. Vernon Jones, Georgia, correct. So he's running for office, and he sat down with Steve Bannon. He was on Steve Bannon's podcast, and he made some comments that got headlines in Mediaite and perhaps some other places as well. He's talking about the gay rights movement here. Let's take a look, and then I'll react.
You can't tell me Dr. King supported abortions, late-term abortions. You can't tell me that Dr. King did not support traditional families. You cannot tell me that Dr. King didn't support enforcing the law at our borders. Civil rights and gay rights, let me tell you, civil rights for blacks and gay rights for gays are two different things.
They say it's the same thing.
But it's not the same thing. It is that, because you know what? I don't know what you are unless you tell me what you are if you're gay. But when I walk in that room, you can tell that I'm black. I'm black from cradle to grave. Let's not get that confused. But they can actually change. You know, you can go from being straight to being gay to being transgender and all these other genders. But when you're black, I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. So to compare the two, when did gays come over here in ships?
When did gays come over here in ships? All right, so let's go through some of this. What he says, there's a number of things he says there that are out there. He says civil rights and gay rights are two different things. Now, yeah, functionally, one of them is about discrimination over skin color. Another one is about discrimination over sexual orientation. But the connecting tissue is what? It's legal discrimination against somebody for an immutable characteristic, something about themselves that they have no control over, they can't change. You know, you can't decide to change your ancestry and your background and your ethnicity. You can't decide to change your skin color. You can't decide to change your sexuality. If, you know, whoever or whatever you're attracted to appears to be relatively set in stone, so it's either the quote-unquote born that way idea. There's, you know, that's one of the two possibilities. Or the other possibility is something happens when you're young that it gives you imprints of sexuality, and then that is your sexuality for the rest of your life. But look, if you think you can change it, I mean, I'll talk to everybody who's watching this video right now. Go ahead. Do you think you can change through force of will whatever things you're into particularly? You know, whatever your kinks are, or whoever you're attracted to. You think you could just force of will your way out of that, or go to therapy and some dickhead doctor will like casually hypnotize you and get you? What are we talking about here? So it is very, 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 very similar. It is discrimination against a person or a group of people based on immutable characteristics that they can't change. Now, Vernon Jones, his position is, well, you know, I'm against the racism because that affects me. But am I against the homophobia? No. I'm for, quote, traditional families. He brings up Martin Luther King. Oh, God. Okay. All right. So remember, this guy's a conservative Republican. He's Trump-backed, right? He brings up MLK. And he brings up, well, what would MLK think about abortion? What would he think about, you know, gay marriage? Or he was pro-traditional families. He was pro-enforcing our laws at the border. I genuinely don't know what Martin Luther King's take was on the border. But here's what I do know about Martin Luther King. He was a self-described democratic socialist. That's what he was. So anytime people on the right try to like claim him, so well, actually he'd agree with all of my political opinions. We don't need to pontificate, because thankfully he talked about politics. He talked about all these issues, and he did not leave it open to interpretation too much. You know, he famously said the worst injustice is injustice in the form of healthcare. He was somebody who was for a universal healthcare system. Is Vernon Jones in favor of that? I don't think he's in favor of that. He said, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government. Talk about the Vietnam War. So he's deeply anti-intervention and anti-imperialist. Did Vernon Jones bring that up? No, he didn't bring that up. And the list goes on and on. I mean, this is a guy, remember, when he was killed, he was backing union workers. He was trying to get higher pay for working people. This guy, look, I don't know much about him specifically, but we all know as far as elected Republicans go, they would bust up every union in the country in a second if they could. In a heartbeat, they would do it. So it's always funny to me when these guys try to claim Martin Luther King Jr. And you see this all the time, too, with, conservatives with the whole, judge people based on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin. That's something that I absolutely agree with 100%. But they trot that out and then try to pretend like, well, in every way he agreed with us. And by the way, let me just state for the record here, even if it is true that Martin Luther King was not in favor of gay marriage, okay, he'd be wrong. I disagree with him from time to time, as you should. It's like when people, trot out Noam Chomsky whenever he makes a point that's convenient to their argument. Like, oh yeah, well, I guess you disagree with Noam Chomsky on this. And it's like, yeah. End? That's not some sort of debate ender, by the way. But I thought that I thought we were largely done with these arguments at this late date. I did. I mean, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm silly, but, having doing this for a decade, seeing the peaks and the valleys of the culture war and what movement, what direction everything's gone, you thought to some extent, well, the anti-gay animus has died down, at least in the sense that the Supreme Court ruled there's a right to gay marriage. If you love somebody who cares what they are, you have a legal right. It's equal protection under the law. And so with that, there was this sense of like, okay, God, we've moved past it. Trump, although his policies were not all that favorable, he very famously held like the LGBTQ flag when he was at an event in 2016. And you got the sense that even the right is going to get over this. But every now and then, some old school one pops up and they're like, they're not in favor of any of the progress that's been made and they're not even going to let the issue go. But ultimately, what I would say to them is, okay, if that's your prerogative, by all means, go right ahead. Because I know the polling on this, the American people are definitive on issues like this now. What was the most recent poll? Like 70% or something support gay marriage. And the list goes on. 70% support legalizing recreational marijuana. The list goes on and on. You guys are fighting a losing battle. And if this is what you want to spend your time talking about, how you want to roll back the clock and take away rights that are already won, go right ahead. Go right ahead. But remember, Trump-backed candidate, Trump-endorsed candidate. And so he didn't, chart a new path for the Republican Party in any real way. This, honestly, you can't help but think of the Dave Rubin thing in the context of this story. Because Dave Rubin really thought, oh, well, the right is over all their hang-ups that were there on gay people. He really believes that. And so when he announced, I'm having 2 kids with my husband, I think he mostly expected, good for you, man, hooray. But there were a number of very prominent right-wing figures who were like, this is sin, this is evil, this is basically the same thing as slavery. You guys having a surrogate, to have the babies and raising the kids. Baby needs a mother and a father. And so they didn't get over it. A lot of them didn't get over it. And Vernon Jones is clearly of that mindset. And I can't imagine what my life would be like if I was sitting there obsessed with this issue. Sitting there at this late date thinking like, oh, we got to take those kids away from the gays and we can't let the gays get married. Because by the way, there was also, there was a study on this and turns out kids of gay parents, they end up doing just as well, if not better, than kids of straight families. And, they do phenomenally well in school. I think that was the study. That's what they looked at in this particular study. But it's still out there, man. That anti-gay animus is still out there and it's still cloaked in absurd arguments. Basically, he's trying to use his blackness as a shield to say, discriminating against us is bad, discriminating against the gays, well, MLK supported discriminating against them. And it's not the same. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Sure, both things are discriminating against people based on immutable characteristics. They can't change, but it's not the same thing because one is me and the other one's not me. So, just hope that got through to everybody. Okay. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.